Welcome to Nocturnal Tales. Tonight, we're in Copenhagen, 1932, a city that looks clean, calm, and perfectly ordered, until a single violent moment shatters that illusion. A young bank clerk commits a terrible act and insists again and again that he was made to do it. Was it panic, delusion, or something colder? The slow, deliberate pressure of one mind upon another. As always, this is an original Nocturnal Tales story, written in the spirit and style of the great Golden Age mysteries, but entirely our own creation. And if you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. The links are in the description. Now then, listen closely. Keep your conclusions in check, and do not trust the obvious too soon. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Visit from Copenhagen. It is my belief that there are few things more dangerous in this world than a fashionable idea. A knife is at least honest. Poison, if one may put it so, proceeds according to rule. But once a notion takes hold of society, whether it be table rapping, glandular rejuvenation, spirit photography, or the conviction that every second man possesses a mysterious power over the mind of his neighbor, there is really no saying where common sense will end and melodrama begin. It was in the early spring of 1932 that Hercule Poirot, having declared himself in need of quiet after an especially trying business in Brussels, allowed himself to be persuaded into spending a fortnight in Copenhagen. I had not previously visited Denmark, and imagined, in the vague English manner, a place of clean streets, sensible people, and severe weather. In this, I was not entirely mistaken. Copenhagen struck me at once as orderly without being dull, civilized without ostentation, and possessed of that curious northern brightness which makes even a grey day look somehow polished. Poirot approved of it. "It is a city," he observed, standing at the window of our hotel and surveying a street down which bicycles passed with military regularity, "that believes in discipline. Look at the pavements, Hastings. They are clean enough to console the soul." "You cannot solve crimes by looking at pavements," I said. He turned and raised a finger. "One can solve many things by observing what people do not wish to notice. Dirt, for example. Disorder. The small betrayals of character." I had no answer to this, and was still considering whether the Danish soul was indeed consoled by its pavements when our quiet holiday came abruptly to an end. The visitor was announced shortly after 11. He was shown up at once, and I remember that my first impression was of a man who had forgotten how to occupy his own body. He was not old, perhaps 35, but his movements had an anxious hesitancy, as though each gesture required permission. He wore a dark overcoat of good quality, though it had been fastened wrongly at the neck, and his pale, fair hair was brushed back in a manner that would have been neat enough had his hand not clearly passed through it several times on the journey. He introduced himself in good, careful English as Dr. Erik Lund. "I must beg your pardon for intruding," he said. "I should not have come without an introduction, but I was told in the lobby that Monsieur Poirot is indeed the celebrated detective, and the matter is one in which the police, at least officially, can do very little." Poirot inclined his head. "Sit down, Doctor. When the police can do very little, that is often when Hercule Poirot can do something. Coffee, perhaps?" The man accepted it with gratitude, though he scarcely touched the cup once it arrived. He kept one gloved hand upon his knee, and the other pressed lightly against the arm of the chair, as though to steady himself. "It concerns a bank clerk," he said, "a young man named Niels Sørensen. 2 mornings ago he entered the offices of the Handelsbanken branch at a few minutes past 10. He carried a revolver. He demanded money from the cashier. When the alarm was raised and 2 employees moved to stop him, he fired twice." He stopped. Poirot's face had altered very little, but I knew the look. He had ceased to be polite and become attentive. "They are dead?" he asked. "One died immediately, the other within the hour." "And the clerk, this Sørensen?" "He did not escape. He ran into the street, was pursued, and was seized before he had gone 200 yards. He appeared bewildered. He did not resist much. Several witnesses say that he kept repeating, 'I had to do it. He told me I must.'" Poirot folded his hands. "Ah." The doctor looked from one of us to the other. "You see why I have come." "I see," said Poirot, "that a man commits murder and says another man told him to do it. This is not yet extraordinary. Weak men have been making that excuse since Cain." Dr. Lund coloured faintly. "Yes, naturally. If it ended there, I should not trouble you. But there is another man." He drew a breath before continuing. "His name is Johann Marcusson. He is older, 40 perhaps. A former insurance employee. Intelligent, highly educated in patches. One of those men who know a little about many things and a great deal about none. He has, for some years, cultivated a reputation in certain circles as a student of mesmerism, suggestion, and abnormal psychology." "That sounds," I said, "like the sort of fellow who lives by talking to women in drawing rooms." Dr. Lund gave me a quick, troubled glance. "In England, perhaps. Here he has managed something slightly more sinister. He gives private demonstrations. He has written pamphlets. He speaks of the will, of domination, of the hidden forces that govern the ordinary man. Most take him for a charlatan. Some find him impressive. Unfortunately, young Sørensen was among the latter." Poirot said quietly, "They knew one another well?" "Yes, for nearly a year." "And this Marcusson, is he under arrest?" "No. That is the difficulty. He was questioned. He admits knowing Sørensen. He admits discussing suggestion and control of the mind with him. But he denies every criminal intent. He says the young man was unstable, obsessed, and wished to impress him. There is, as yet, no proof to place a weapon in Marcusson's hand or an order upon his lips." "Yet you believe he is guilty?" Dr. Lund hesitated. It was the hesitation of an honest man, unwilling to claim more than he could defend. "I believe," he said slowly, "that Niels Sørensen did not act in the ordinary way. Whether that means domination, manipulation, fear, or some form of diseased admiration, I do not know. But I know the young man. He has been my patient." "Your patient?" I exclaimed. "Yes, for nervous exhaustion, insomnia, and episodes of suggestibility, though I dislike the term. He is not a born criminal, Captain Hastings, nor is he mad in the crude sense. He is timid, dutiful, eager to please, and peculiarly dependent upon stronger personalities." Poirot nodded. "A sheep." Dr. Lund winced, but accepted it. "Yes, a sheep, if you like. And Marcusson is the kind of man who cannot see a sheep without wishing to discover whether it may be driven over a cliff." There was a silence after that. From the street below came the bell of a bicycle and the distant roll of a tram. In the hotel corridor, a chambermaid laughed briefly and was hushed. Poirot looked at our visitor with narrowed eyes. "You are not here only as a physician, Dr. Lund." The man started. "No?" "No. You are here because something has frightened you, not merely the crime. Something personal." For the first time, a distinct expression crossed the Dane's face. It was not surprise alone, but the painful relief of a man who has carried a burden too far and knows himself discovered. He said in a low voice, "Yesterday evening I received a note." He took an envelope from the inner pocket of his coat and handed it across. It was plain, unaddressed, and contained a single folded sheet. Poirot opened it delicately. There was very little written on it. Only this: "Doctors should be careful when they interfere with experiments. There are minds that break, and minds that are broken. I gave a short exclamation. Good Lord. Poirot handed me the paper. The words were written in a neat, slanting hand, almost scholarly in appearance. Yet there was something in their cold precision that I did not like at all. You showed this to the police? Yes. They advise prudence and said anonymous threats are common after notorious crimes, which is true enough, but I do not think this came from the public. Poirot rose. When Hercule Poirot rose in that particular way, smoothly, with no waste of motion, like an actor who has at last heard his proper cue, I knew that our holiday was finished. My dear doctor, he said, you were perfectly right to come. We shall begin at once. First, you will take us to see this young man, Sørensen. After that, we shall pay a visit to Monsieur Marcusson, who studies the mind. I also study it, but I have the advantage over him. What advantage is that? I asked. Poirot put on his hat with care and gave the faintest smile. I do not worship it. Chapter 2. The Patient in the Cell. I have observed that there are few places in the world more depressing than those in which an institution has done its best to be humane. Brutality, at any rate, has the merit of being plain, but cleanliness, restraint, official kindness, and the persistent odor of soap contrive sometimes to make misery appear even more intolerable by contrast. The detention wing to which Dr. Lund conducted us that afternoon was not, I think, a cruel place. It was orderly, spare, and well lit. The corridor walls were painted in a pale color intended, no doubt, to calm the nerves. A uniformed officer spoke quietly. Doors opened and closed with a deliberate economy of sound. Yet over the whole place there hung the unmistakable oppression of a building in which men waited to learn whether their lives had ended already or only begun to do so. Our introduction had been prepared by Lund, and perhaps also by the curious prestige which Poirot's name still possessed even abroad. At all events, after a short delay and a certain amount of official hesitation, we were admitted to see Niels Sørensen. He was younger than I had expected, no more than 27 or 28, and of that fair, mild Scandinavian type which, in repose, can look almost boyish. But there was nothing boyish in him now. He sat at a small table with his hands clasped so tightly together that the knuckles showed white, and when we entered he looked up with the hunted expression of a man who has not slept properly for days. The warder withdrew to the door. Poirot remained standing for a moment, observing him. "Monsieur Sørensen," he said gently, "this is Captain Hastings. I am Hercule Poirot. Dr. Lund has told you of me?" The young man gave a slight nod. "Yes." His English, unlike the doctor's, came haltingly, and Lund intervened now and then in Danish to ease the strain. Yet often the fellow seemed anxious to speak in our language, as though he wished to make the thing clear beyond all possibility of misunderstanding. Poirot sat opposite him. "You know why I am here?" "Yes." "To see if I am mad." "No," said Poirot, "to see if you are lying." The young man flinched, not theatrically, but as though a raw surface had been touched. After a moment he said, "I would rather that." "That you were mad?" "That I were a liar." Poirot said nothing. It was his way, when he had struck the right chord, to let it sound. At length Sørensen spoke again. "I did it," he said. "I went into the bank. I had the revolver. I asked for the money. When Peterson came round the counter and Holmes shouted, I fired. I remember the sound very clearly. Not loud, as one imagines, more like something bursting in a cupboard. Then there was shouting. A woman cried out. I ran. You remember all this distinctly?" "Yes." "And before it?" A shadow crossed the man's face. "That is where it becomes wrong." "How wrong?" Sørensen swallowed. "I had not meant to go there that morning. I had been at my lodgings. I was ill, nervous, shaking, no appetite. I had not slept properly in a week. I kept thinking, I must not see him. I must not go near him again. Him? Marcusson. Dr. Lund shifted slightly, but Poirot did not glance at him. You feared Marcusson? I admired him, said the young man with miserable honesty. Then I feared him. He spoke as though he understood everything, the mechanism of people, you know. Why one man succeeds and another obeys, why one woman marries badly, why a clerk remains a clerk. He said most people walk in asleep and call it life. That is the talk of many fools, I said. Sørensen gave me a weary look. Yes, but he did not sound a fool. Go on, said Poirot. He would talk for hours. Not nonsense, exactly. Books, science, doctors in France, old experiments, soldiers who obeyed at once when given a fixed tone of command. He said the mind could be trained like a dog, or broken like a horse. He said resistance was vanity. If one truly strong will met one weaker will, the matter was decided already. And you believed him? At first, not completely. Then, less and less I knew what I believed. Did he ever place you in a trance? Sørensen shut his eyes. I do not know. Poirot leaned forward. You must know something. The young man opened his eyes again with a kind of desperation. I know this. There are times with him that I cannot remember properly. Not blank places exactly. More like a room seen through smoke. He would have me sit in a chair. He would speak very quietly. Sometimes he would tell me to look at a point. Once the brass head of his cane, once the knot of his tie, once the reflection in a glass paperweight on his desk. He said it was only concentration. He said all disciplined men must learn concentration. And afterward? I would feel tired, ashamed, as though I had talked too much, or agreed to something foolish. What sort of thing? Sørensen's mouth twitched. That I was weak. That ordinary morality is for ordinary men. That courage is not thought but action. That if one wishes to become free, one must perform an act from which one cannot retreat. There was a little silence. Poirot asked very softly, Did he tell you to rob the bank? No. To kill? No, not in words. Ah. Poirot sat back. That is important. The young man's face contorted suddenly. But he put it there. The cry burst from him with such force that the warder at the door shifted at once. Sørensen lowered his voice with visible effort. He put it there, he repeated. Do you not understand? It was always in pieces before, phrases, pictures, a challenge. He said one must prove oneself. He said men only discover their true nature at the edge of irreversible action. The week before, I remember this very well, he said that a locked till and a timid heart are cousins, that one opens with pressure and the other with contempt. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The week before the crime? Yes. And on the morning itself? Did you see him? Sørensen hesitated. I think so. Dr. Lund leaned in. Think, Niels. I passed through Kongens Nytorv, or perhaps not. I cannot swear it. I remember the square and then a cafe window, and then his voice beside me saying, Today perhaps you will cease to be a worm. But when I turn it over, I do not know whether he truly stood there, or whether I had only heard him say such things so often that I carried the voice inside my own head. This, I confess, gave me an unpleasant sensation. The room seemed suddenly smaller. I glanced at Poirot, but he remained infuriatingly composed. Did you own the revolver already? He asked. No. Then where did it come from? Sørensen stared at him. It was in my pocket. Yes, but how came it there? I do not know. He said it flatly, without drama. It was, in its way, the most convincing thing he had uttered. Poirot rose. "That will do for today." Sørensen looked up sharply. "You believe me?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "I believe that you fired the shots. I believe also that you are not by nature a man who begins his day with murder in his pocket. Between those two facts lies the truth. It is there that I work." We went out into the corridor. Lund drew a long breath, as though he had himself been under examination. "Well?" he asked. Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he took from his pocket the threatening note and compared it, to my surprise, with the entry log lying upon a side desk. I glanced over his shoulder. Surely that cannot help. "On the contrary, Hastings, it helps a great deal." He tapped the paper lightly. "The same hand has written both this threat and 3 visitor signatures in the prison register during the last fortnight." Lund stared. "You are certain?" "I am morally certain. The formality of the capitals, the slope of the lower loop in the G, the little pedantry of the crossed T. Our anonymous philosopher has been here." "To see Sørensen?" "Without doubt." "But under what name?" Poirot turned the ledger toward us. There, among the entries, were 3 signatures from different days. J. Madsen, J. Mortensen, J. Mark. Poirot's mouth hardened. "Not even an original liar," he said. "Only a vain one. He cannot resist leaving himself the initial." "And now?" I asked. Poirot closed the book. "Now, my friend, we visit Monsieur Marcusson. I have heard enough of his theories. I wish to see his furniture." Chapter 3. The Rooms of Mr. Marcusson. There are certain men who arrange their surroundings as others arrange alibis. Every object is chosen not merely for use, but for effect. Every shelf, lamp, and chair contributes to an argument. One is intended to leave such rooms less informed than influenced. The chambers of Johann Marcusson occupied the first floor of a narrow building in a respectable street not far from the lakes. From below, the house gave no sign of eccentricity. Its door was polished, its brass tidy, its curtains discreet. Only when we were admitted by a silent elderly woman in black, who might have been servant or sister or merely one more piece of the man's self-invention, did the character of the place begin to show itself. The hall smelled faintly of tobacco, furniture polish, and some sharper scent I could not place at once. Something medicinal, but dressed up with perfume. The sitting room into which we were shown was large, high-ceilinged, and over-furnished in the continental style. Heavy curtains framed the windows. Books lined 2 walls, though I observed that a surprising number appeared never to have been cut. There were oriental rugs, a bronze bust of Socrates, a polished globe, and on a side table an assortment of objects which seemed selected less for beauty than for suggestive power. A crystal paperweight, a metronome, a silver pendulum on a stand, a carved ivory hand, and several curious little boxes with brass catches. "He has staged the whole place," I muttered. Poirot gave the faintest nod. "Yes. But it is never the stage, Hastings. It is where the paint has cracked behind the scenery." I had not long to consider this, for the door opened and Johann Marcusson himself entered. He was not, as I had half expected, a dramatic-looking fellow. That would have been too simple. He was of middle height, broad across the shoulders, with a smooth face that might in another profession have appeared entirely respectable. His hair was brushed back with care. His moustache, though modest, was precisely clipped. His dark suit was well cut, without being flamboyant. Only the eyes disturbed one. They were very pale and very steady, and had that peculiar fixed courtesy which suggests not calm, but control. He greeted Dr. Lund with the sort of politeness one offers a tradesman whose existence one cannot quite avoid. "Doctor, this is unexpected." Then he turned to us, and Lund performed the introductions. For the briefest instant, Marcusson's expression altered. Not fear, he was too practiced for that, but a minute recalculation, as though a chess player had discovered that the unassuming little man opposite him was not after all one of the pieces. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "your name is known even here, though I confess I did not expect to meet you in my sitting-room." "No more did I expect to meet you in Copenhagen," said Poirot pleasantly. "And yet here we all are. Life is full of these little surprises." If the thrust was felt, Marcusson gave no sign of it. He invited us to sit. Tea was offered. Poirot accepted it. I did not. A man may take tea with a bishop under suspicion, but somehow there are limits. Marcusson seated himself with admirable composure. "I assume this concerns the unfortunate business at the bank." "It concerns," said Poirot, "the deaths of 2 men." "Yes, of course." He lowered his eyes for precisely the proper fraction of a second. "A deplorable act. The poor young fool has destroyed several lives, including his own." "You call him a fool?" I said. Marcusson turned his bland gaze upon me. "My dear Captain, any man who imagines violence will improve his position in the world is a fool. Is that controversial in England?" I should have replied sharply, but Poirot forestalled me. "You knew Sørensen well?" "Well enough to regret it. He was an unstable young man with a tendency to hero worship. Such people are dangerous company." "Because they may imitate?" "Because they may misunderstand?" Poirot accepted his tea and set the cup down untasted. "I am told you take an interest in suggestion, mesmerism, abnormal psychology." Marcusson smiled faintly. "I take an interest in many things. That is the privilege of a curious mind." "And do you practice these arts?" "Arts? What a theatrical word." "No, Monsieur Poirot. I read, I discuss. Occasionally I demonstrate concentration exercises to impressionable people who expect miracles and are disappointed to discover only breathing and attention." "Yet young Sørensen believed you had power over him." Marcusson shrugged. "The world is full of weak men who prefer enchantment to responsibility. If he robbed a bank, he will naturally look for a sorcerer." There was something so cold in the easy contempt with which he dismissed the fellow that I felt, irrationally perhaps, a wish to strike him. Poirot merely said, "And you supplied him with nothing stronger than conversation?" "Nothing at all." "Not even a revolver?" For the first time Marcusson laughed, not warmly, not even with amusement. It was the short laugh of a man who wishes to signal that a topic is beneath him. "My dear sir, if I had desired a bank robbed, do you imagine I should choose Niels Sørensen as my instrument? One might as well send a rabbit to collect a debt." The phrase was memorable. Too memorable, perhaps. I saw Poirot notice it and store it away. Lund said sharply, "Then you admit you studied him?" "I observed him," replied Marcusson, turning without haste, as one observes any specimen of weakness that insists on presenting itself. He came to me. He admired me. He begged to be instructed. I did not ask for the burden. "You encouraged him," said Lund. "I tolerated him." They looked at one another, and I had the distinct sense that something older than the present crime lay between them. Not friendship, certainly, not ordinary dislike either. There was knowledge there, professional perhaps, or personal, that neither meant to bring into the open. Poirot broke the silence. "Dr. Lund received a threatening note yesterday." Marcusson's eyes shifted to him at once, though only for a second. "Indeed? How unpleasant." It suggested that doctors should be careful when they interfere with experiments. Then perhaps the doctor should be careful. Copenhagen has no shortage of lunatics with pencils. I saw Lund's hand tighten on the arm of his chair, but Poirot again intervened before he could speak. "You have many visitors, Monsieur Marcusson?" "Enough." "Patients?" "I am not a physician." "Clients?" A faint smile. "What an ugly commercial word. What then shall we call them?" "People who are tired of being ordinary." Poirot let that pass. "And this lady who admitted us, is she your housekeeper?" "My aunt." "Ah, she keeps house for you." "She prefers that expression to 'observes my ruin.'" I should have called that charming, had it come from almost anyone else. From Marcusson it had the effect of a rehearsed line. Poirot rose and strolled, apparently at random, toward the side table with its collection of mechanical and decorative nonsense. He looked at the metronome, the pendulum, the crystal, and one of the brass-latched boxes. "You permit?" "Certainly." Poirot opened the box. Inside were cards, each bearing a single word or phrase written in neat capital letters. "Sleep calm. Obey, remember silence." He glanced at them only a moment before replacing them exactly as he had found them. "For concentration?" he asked. "For stage effects," said Marcusson lightly. "One must give people what they expect. If a foolish woman pays to hear about the subconscious, she does not wish to be told merely that her husband bores her." Poirot next touched the silver pendulum. It swayed faintly. "And this also is theatre?" "My dear Monsieur Poirot, half of civilization is theatre." "True," said Poirot, "but the interesting half is what happens after the audience has gone home." Marcusson's eyes rested on him, pale and unreadable. "You suspect me," he said. Poirot turned. "I suspect everybody. That is why I am useful." "And what is it you suspect in me?" "That you enjoy influence." "Who does not?" Poirot smiled. "Ah, but there are degrees. Some enjoy being admired. Others enjoy being obeyed. The second kind are always more tiresome." Marcusson rose now as well. The atmosphere had altered without any outward breach of civility. One felt the boards beneath the carpet. "I have answered your questions," he said. "I cannot prevent a murderer from speaking my name if it comforts him. But if Copenhagen chooses to turn every unhappy clerk into evidence against any man with a library, then scholarship will soon become difficult." It was a clever remark, too clever by half. Poirot bowed slightly as though acknowledging an equal at cards. "At present," he said, "scholarship need not fear us. Good afternoon, Monsieur Marcusson." We had nearly reached the door when Poirot stopped. "One thing more. On the morning of the crime, between 9 and 10, where were you?" Marcusson did not hesitate. "At home." "With your aunt?" "Yes." "Continuously?" A pause. Tiny but real. "No. She was out for part of the morning. I was reading." "What?" Again that fractional pause. "Schopenhauer." Poirot inclined his head. "Of course." We were shown out by the old woman in black. As she opened the outer door, her eyes flicked once, very swiftly, from Lund to Poirot. There was fear in them, unless I greatly misread the matter, but fear of whom I could not tell. Out in the street I drew a long breath. "Well," I said, "there is your man." Poirot did not answer at once. He was looking back up at the curtained first-floor windows. "No," he said at last. "There is a man. That is not the same thing." "You don't believe him?" "I believe," said Poirot, "that he lies beautifully. But beautiful lies are common, Hastings. What matters is whether they cover the truth we seek, or merely another lie beneath it." Lund, who had been silent ever since we left the room, said abruptly, "You noticed it too?" Poirot turned. "The tension between you and Monsieur Marcusson? Naturally. Lund gave a short, tired laugh. Then I may as well tell you this much. 5 years ago we were both connected in different ways with a private clinic outside Roskilde. Nothing criminal, nothing that could be proved at least. But some methods were used there which I came to regard as dangerous. Involving suggestion? Poirot asked. Yes, and vulnerable patients. Did Marcusson work there? Not officially. He visited. He observed. He attached himself to one of the physicians, Professor Hagerup, a man more ambitious than wise. The place was eventually closed after a scandal not directly connected to any crime. Records disappeared. People denied everything. But from that time onward, I have distrusted Marcusson profoundly. Did Sørensen ever go there? No. He was a child then. Poirot nodded, as though fitting a small but important piece into a drawer already half full. And Professor Hagerup? He asked. Lund looked away. Dead. 2 years now. Convenient, I said. Poirot gave me a glance. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. He began to walk back toward the main street, very fast for him. I knew the sign. What is it? I asked. Something in that room was wrong. There were 20 things wrong in that room. Yes, but one of them was useful. He did not explain further until we had reached the corner, where he stopped before a tobacconist's window and looked, not at the pipes, but at his own reflection in the glass. The books, he said. What of them? Marcusson claimed to be reading Schopenhauer at the hour of the murders. In his library there is Schopenhauer in German, Danish, and French. Very impressive. Only one thing is missing. What? A reader. And before I could demand what on earth he meant by that, he turned briskly away and announced that we must, without delay, speak to the aunt. And now, before we resume, a brief word from the Bureau. Many of you ask where our stories may be found beyond YouTube. The answer is quite simple. Only one story makes its way to YouTube each week. Beyond that, we publish 3 new stories every week on Patreon, where supporters help us keep the lamps lit, the papers in order, and the next mystery upon the writing desk. For those who are not in a position to support us there, 2 of those weekly stories are also released on Spotify. And Spotify is free. There is no need for a paid membership. Much like YouTube, listening there without paying still supports the creator through advertisements. For those who prefer to support the show more directly, we also have Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal, and you will find those links in the description below. The plain truth is that our YouTube channel is not monetized. That means these stories continue only because listeners choose to support them through Patreon, Spotify, Buy Me a Coffee, and PayPal. Without that support, productions of this kind become very difficult to continue. For those who wish to step inside the archive, Patreon offers The Listening Room, $2.99 a month, ad-free episodes and early access, The Writing Table, $12 a month, voting on themes, behind-the-scenes notes, character sheets, inspirations, alternate endings, and your name in our monthly credits. The Archive Society, $30 a month. Quarterly ebook anthologies in PDF and EPUB, with your name printed among the patrons of the Archive Society. Our thanks, as ever, to those who make these stories possible. And now, back to the case. Chapter 4. The Hidden Truth. It is always a mistake, I think, to assume that the most silent person in a room is therefore the least significant. The talkative may distract, the clever may dazzle, the violent may alarm, but it is often the quiet observer who has been storing away the true account while the others perform. Poirot, having announced his intention of speaking to Marcusson's aunt, did not march back at once to the front door and demand admission like an inspector in a penny serial. That is not his way. Instead, he spent the better part of an hour in what appeared to be the most irrelevant occupations, purchasing cigarettes he did not smoke, pausing before a stationer's window, asking a bookseller 3 questions about imported German editions, and standing for so long beside the railings of the lakes that I began to suspect him of contemplating waterfowl. At length I said so. He replied without looking at me. "When a house contains 2 minds, Hastings, it is foolish to interrogate only the one that expects interrogation." "I suppose you mean the aunt." "Obviously." "And what are we waiting for?" "For her nephew to leave." We had not much longer to wait. At a little before 4, Marcusson emerged from the house in a dark overcoat and gloves, carrying a cane with a silver-mounted head. He walked smartly, not like an idle man taking the air, but like one going to keep an appointment, which he considered of importance. Poirot watched him turn the corner and vanish toward the broader thoroughfare. "Good," he said. "Now we may visit the lady without the theatre manager." We returned at once and rang. This time it was some minutes before the door opened, and when it did, the old woman in black stood there with visible reluctance. Up close, she was not so old as I had first thought. 60, perhaps less. Thin-featured, with a worn but still handsome bone structure, and a pair of dark eyes that had the strained alertness of a creature long accustomed to listening for danger in its own home. Poirot removed his hat. "Madame, forgive us. We have returned only for a word or 2. Your nephew is out, I think?" Her face changed at once, not with pleasure, certainly, but with the loosening of an inward brace. "He is not at home." "Then perhaps," said Poirot very gently, "this is the moment when one may speak." She looked from him to Lund, and something in that glance confirmed what I had suspected before. She knew the doctor already, and knew him from circumstances not at all agreeable. "I should not," she said in careful English. "It is better not." "For whom?" asked Poirot. She did not answer. "Madame," he said, "2 men are dead. Another may yet hang or live ruined. And there is fear in this house, fear old enough to have settled into the furniture. These are not small things." At that she opened the door wider. We were shown not into the theatrical sitting-room of our earlier visit, but into a back parlour overlooking a narrow yard. It was plainly furnished, almost austerely so. There was sewing by the window, a small porcelain lamp, a Bible with a marker in it, and on the mantel a framed photograph of a younger woman with the same dark eyes and straighter shoulders. It was the first room in the house that felt human. "My name," she said, remaining standing as though reluctant to commit herself even to a chair, "is Anna Marcusson. I am not his aunt. I am his sister." That fact, simple as it was, seemed to alter the proportions of things. A sister may know a man too well to be deceived by his invented self. Poirot inclined his head. "Thank you. Already we have advanced." She gave a faint, humourless smile. "He says aunt, because it sounds less vulgar. A sister suggests shared childhood. He does not care for that." "You have lived with him long?" "On and off, since our mother died permanently." "And are you afraid of him?" Dr. Lund made a little involuntary movement at the directness of the question, but Poirot did not soften it. Anna Marcusson's hands tightened together. "Yes." There was no melodrama in the answer. She uttered it as one states the weather. Poirot said, "Because he is violent." "No." "Then why?" She glanced toward the door before replying. "Because he likes to know what frightens people. Once he knows it, he does not always use it. That is worse." I confess the sentence gave me a slight chill. Lund spoke for the first time. "Anna, has he threatened you?" She looked at him with something like irritation. "You ask as if it would matter whether I say yes?" "It matters to me." "Yes," she said, "in the old way. Never enough for police. Always enough for silence." Poirot seated himself at last, though lightly, as though making it easier for her to do the same. After a moment she sat opposite him. "Tell me," he said, "what sort of boy he was." Her eyes moved at once to the photograph on the mantel, then back. Not what people now imagine, not brilliant, not magnetic, not born to lead, that would flatter him. He was observant, secretive, vain and resentful. If another child had a thing he wanted, he did not snatch it. He discovered who had broken the schoolmaster's window and made sure blame travelled where it would do most harm. When our father beat him, he never cried. He learned instead what made other people cry. "And your father beat him often?" "Often enough." "Cruelly?" She hesitated. "As men then beat boys. There was nothing exceptional in it." Poirot's face remained expressionless, but I knew he had noted the distinction. What a generation excuses as ordinary may still deform a character, yet it is not in itself explanation for every later wickedness. "He has always been interested in influence?" Poirot asked. Anna gave a tiny shrug. "In power, yes. Not politics. Never anything so public. Personal power. To make another person doubt himself. That pleased him very early. When he was 17, he convinced our cousin she had confessed to a theft while half asleep. She had done no such thing. But for 2 days, she believed she had and nearly made herself ill with shame. He thought it amusing. "Good God," I said. She turned to me. "That is what people always say when they hear one story. Then they meet him in a good suit and say how intelligent he is." Poirot let the remark settle. "You know Dr. Lund from the clinic outside Roskilde?" "Yes." "You were there?" Her lips pressed together. "For 6 months. After my husband died." There was a small silence. It became instantly clear that neither widowhood nor treatment had been simple in her case. "For nerves?" Poirot asked. "For grief, they said. For sleeplessness. For episodes of confusion. I had lost weight. I could not pray properly. That was enough, apparently, to make me suitable material for improvement." Lund's face hardened. I saw then that his guilt in the matter ran deeper than professional distaste. "You were a patient of Professor Hagerup?" said Poirot. "Yes." "And your brother visited?" "Frequently. He had no official place there, but Hagerup admired him. They admired one another. There were sessions, experiments, talk of releasing the hidden will, overcoming inhibition, creating stronger personalities. Nonsense dressed as science. Some of the patients grew quieter, some grew worse. One woman began waking at night and obeying instructions she did not remember receiving. Another tried to walk into a lake because she had been told, under treatment, that water would restore equilibrium. Lund said sharply, "Anna, there was no proof that—" She cut across him with sudden bitterness. "No proof. There is never proof when men play with minds and write their own reports afterward." Poirot's gaze flicked between them. "And you, madame? What happened to you there?" Her eyes fell. He tried methods on me. "Hagerup? No. My brother." It was the first moment in which her composure visibly cracked. Not wholly, not theatrically, but the next words came with effort. "He said I was an ideal subject because I trusted him once. He would sit by the bed and speak in a low voice when the sedatives had been given. He said grief is only stubbornness. That memory may be reorganized. That obedience is rest." She paused. "Afterward there were hours missing. I would find letters written and not remember writing them. I agreed to things I did not fully understand. When I protested, Hagerup said such treatment may produce emotional resistance. Poirot said very quietly, "Did Lund know?" Anna lifted her head. "Not all of it. Enough perhaps to suspect. Not enough to stop it." The doctor bowed his head a little. He did not defend himself. Poirot asked, "And when the clinic closed?" Hagerup saved himself. Records disappeared. My brother disappeared also for a time, then re-emerged as a lecturer on willpower and the subconscious. Those who had been patients were ashamed, confused, or persuaded they had imagined too much. It was all very clean. "And since then you have lived with him?" "I had nowhere else." There it was. The plain, ugly economy behind so many moral disasters. Poirot glanced toward the outer sitting room. "The objects on the table, the pendulum, the word cards, the crystal, do they belong to real practice or merely display?" "Both," she said. "He likes props. He says ordinary people require symbols in order to surrender efficiently." That was an abominable sentence. Poirot, however, only asked, "And the revolver?" For the first time she looked genuinely startled. "Revolver?" "Yes." "Did your brother keep one?" "I do not know." "Has he ever had access to one?" She thought. "Years ago, perhaps through a friend from military circles, but I never saw one here." Poirot nodded. Then, almost casually, "On the morning of the bank crime, was he at home?" There was a pause long enough to matter. "When the police came, I said yes." "That was not my question." Her eyes met his. "No." Neither Lund nor I spoke. "He left before 9, she said. "He told me he had a meeting and should be back later. When he returned, it was close to 11. He seemed excited, but very controlled, as if he had been acting and was satisfied with the performance. He changed his gloves immediately and asked whether anyone had called." "Why did you tell the police he had been home?" She gave a desolate little movement of the hands. "Because he looked at me once across the room. That is all. Because I knew what would happen next if I contradicted him. Because I have contradicted him before." "Did he say where he had gone?" "No." "Did you tell this to anyone else?" "No." Poirot sat back. His expression did not change, but I knew we had reached something significant at last. Lund said in a low voice, "Anna, you should have come to me." She looked at him almost with pity, and said what? That the man who ruined patients unofficially at a closed clinic had perhaps gone out on the morning another man killed? We would both have been asked for proof, Eric. Poirot rose. "One last thing, madame. Did your brother receive visitors after the crime, private visitors, not police?" "Yes." "Who?" "I do not know the names. 2 women, 1 man with a scar near the mouth, and once—" She stopped. "Yes?" "Once the young clerk himself, before the bank crime. Very late, perhaps 3 nights before. They quarreled. Not loudly. That was not my brother's style. But afterward, I heard something break in the sitting room." "What?" "I do not know. In the morning, the crystal ball, the paperweight thing, was gone from the table." Poirot's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Gone?" "Yes. It returned the next day." That was all we could get from her. She would not speculate, and she knew less of practical details than I had hoped. Yet as we stepped back into the street, I felt more strongly than ever that the case was tightening. Not clarifying, but tightening, like a net drawn from murky water with shapes beginning to show beneath the surface. "Well," I said, "that settles his alibi." Poirot put on his gloves with care. "It injures it. That is not yet the same thing." "Come, Poirot. The sister says he lied." "The sister says he was absent." Excellent. But to do what? To observe? To arrange? To commit? To meet someone? The law, my friend, is a blunt machine. One does not feed its suspicions and expect clockwork. Lund, still grave, asked, "What now?" Poirot looked thoughtfully down the street where the late light was fading from the windows. "Now," he said, "we look for the one thing nobody stages properly." "And what is that?" "The small accident." He glanced at me. "Also, Hastings, I should like very much to know why the crystal object disappeared for one night and returned the next day. Such gestures are rarely meaningless. They belong perhaps to vanity or to panic." Chapter 5. The Small Accident. It has often seemed to me that the success of Hercule Poirot depended less upon his discovering the grand hidden fact than upon his refusal to overlook the tiny visible one. The police may build splendid theories, doctors may trace moral weakness to childhood, barristers may prepare noble speeches concerning responsibility in the modern mind. Poirot, meanwhile, will stand in a doorway and ask why a hat has been moved from one peg to another. The following morning began, appropriately enough, with hats. Poirot had arranged that we should revisit the prison, not to interview poor Sørensen again in any formal way, but to examine the articles taken from him at the time of his arrest. A courteous but puzzled official produced them. A wallet, keys, a cheap watch, a fountain pen, a handkerchief, gloves, some loose coins, and the dark felt hat he had worn that morning. There was also, wrapped separately, the revolver. I was disappointed at once. Nothing could have looked less helpful than the miserable little collection. Poirot, however, examined each item with maddening care. The wallet told us little. The keys were ordinary. The watch was slow by 4 minutes. The pen leaked slightly at the cap. The handkerchief had been washed but badly ironed. The gloves were worn at the fingertips. Even I could see that none of it amounted to much. Then Poirot turned the hat over. It was a decent enough city hat, brushed recently, though shabby at the lining. Poirot ran one finger beneath the inner band, sniffed delicately, and raised his brows. "What is it?" I asked. He handed it to me. I could detect only the faint odor of tobacco and hair oil. "No," said Poirot. "Lower, at the edge." I tried again. There was indeed another scent there. Very faint, but distinct once found. Something medicinal, sharp and slightly sweet. "The same smell," he murmured, "as in Marcusson's hall." Dr. Lund, who stood beside us, leaned in at once. "Chloral preparation," he said quietly, "or something close to it." "You are sure?" "No, but it is not ordinary cologne." Poirot nodded. "And what is curious, Doctor, is not merely that Sørensen carries the smell. A patient might. But why only on the hatband? This defeated me entirely. We next examined the revolver. The official warned us that it had already been handled and recorded, which robbed the thing of much of its dramatic value. Still, Poirot studied it carefully, opening and closing the chamber with neat fingers. "A common enough weapon," said Lund. "Nothing distinctive." "No," said Poirot. "Nothing except that it does not belong naturally to Sørensen." I was beginning to tire of that phrase. "You keep saying that," I objected, "but men may surprise one." Poirot gave me a patient look. "Yes, they may. But the surprises they prepare for themselves differ from those prepared by others." Before I could protest at this piece of pure obscurity, he bent again over the hat. Then suddenly he smiled. "There, the small accident." "What accident?" He pointed to the ribbon inside the band. Near the back, where the stitching met, there was a tiny crescent of darkened fabric, as though something moist had once rested there and dried. "Perspiration?" I suggested. "No, too localized." "And you see the shape?" "A fingertip, perhaps." or the rim of a small object held against the hat. A bottle? Perhaps. Lund frowned. Why would anyone press a bottle against a hat? Poirot said only, "That is what we shall discover." From the prison we drove straight, at Poirot's insistence, to the lodging-house where Sørensen had lived. It stood in a respectable but rather airless street, and was managed by a widow who received us with the sort of alarmed civility landladies reserve for police, tax inspectors, and celebrated detectives. Her name was Mrs. Nielsen, and she remembered everything except what was useful. Yes, Mr. Sørensen had always been quiet. Yes, he had taken his breakfast regularly except of late. Yes, he had seemed nervous. No, she had noticed nothing suspicious. Yes, he had received letters sometimes. No, she had never read them. No, she had not seen a revolver in his possession. No, she had not known his friends, though one gentleman had called more than once. "What gentleman?" said Poirot sharply. She hesitated. A dark one, well-dressed, very polite. Marcusson? I could not say. She could say, however, when pressed, that this gentleman had a curious way of standing too close when he spoke, and that once, after he had gone, she had found Mr. Sørensen sitting quite still in the front parlour, as if he had forgotten what room he was in. "That," said Lund quietly, "is not conclusive." "No," said Poirot, "but it is untidy, which is nearly as good." We were shown to Sørensen's room, a narrow upper chamber with a washstand, iron bed, cheap wardrobe, and writing table. The police had already searched it. Drawers stood half empty. Papers had been gathered and tied. I expected nothing. Poirot went first to the washstand. "Why there?" I asked. "Because a nervous man who sleeps badly lives by small remedies." On the shelf above the basin stood the usual shabby collection: razor, soap, brush, tooth powder, a bottle of aspirin tablets, and a second small brown bottle with no label. Lund picked it up at once and uncorked it. "Bromide mixture," he said. "Quite ordinary." Poirot took the bottle from him and examined the glass against the light. "How much has been used?" "Hard to say. Half, perhaps." "Would it have been prescribed?" "Yes, or bought easily." Poirot nodded but kept the bottle. He then crossed to the table and looked at the blotter. Several sheets had been removed, but impressions remained. He tilted the surface toward the window. I saw only dents and scratches. Poirot, however, read them like scripture. "At least 3 unfinished letters," he said. "One to a sister in Aarhus, one to his bank manager asking for leave, and one, to Marcusson." "You can read that," I cried. "A little. Enough. It begins, 'I shall not come again.' And later there is the phrase, 'You have no right.' Very respectable. Very doomed." He next crouched, to my immense surprise, and peered beneath the bed. From there he drew not some grand hidden document, but a scrap of torn paper no larger than a matchbox label. On it was printed part of a chemist's name, and in pencil, the figure 2, followed by what might have been a V or U. Lund glanced at it. "Not much." "No," said Poirot, "but enough to ask the chemist the wrong question and receive the right answer." By noon we were standing in that chemist's shop. The proprietor, once he had been reassured we were not there to accuse him of poisoning the capital, proved obliging. The fragment, he told us, came from a wrapper they used for certain small bottled preparations. The penciled mark was likely dosage notation. "What preparation?" asked Poirot. The man hesitated. "It could be several." "Which several?" He named 2 harmless sleeping draughts, a cough mixture, and then, after Lund quietly intervened, admitted a 4th possibility: a stronger sedative compound, sometimes made up privately for physicians. "Containing chloral?" asked Lund. "Yes." Poirot's eyes met his. Can such a thing produce confusion? In the wrong dose, certainly. Suggestibility. The chemist spread his hands. I am not a specialist. But it may make a man dulled, compliant, or fogged. Yes. There was a silence after that. As we stepped back into the street, I said, Then that's it. Marcusson drugged him. Poirot gave an impatient little click of the tongue. No. That is not it. That is a possibility. Remember always, Hastings, the fact and the explanation are not husband and wife. Sometimes they are not even acquaintances. Lund Grave now said, Still, we are getting closer. Poirot slipped the scrap of paper into his pocket. Yes. Too close, perhaps, which means our philosopher may soon become clumsy. He had barely spoken when a boy came hurrying along the pavement with an envelope in his hand. For Dr. Lund, he said. Lund took it, frowned, and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet. He read it once, and all the colour left his face. What is it? I demanded. He handed it to Poirot. The message, written in the same neat slanting hand as before, was brief. There is still time to stop meddling. Ask the dead professor what happens to weak subjects. Poirot folded the note carefully. Well, he said, that is interesting. In what way? I asked. He looked at me very hard. In this way, Hastings, our anonymous moralist is no longer threatening at random. He is afraid of something specific. Some of you have asked if there's another way to support us right now. There is one we'd like to share, and it's something my wife and I created together. Alongside Nocturnal Tales, we wrote a children's book called Sherlock Paws and the Diamond of the Nile, available on Amazon. It's a classic detective story, reimagined for younger readers, with one important twist. Sherlock Holmes is a dog. In this story, Sherlock Paws and his loyal companion Dr. Spot set off on an adventure to Egypt, where a valuable diamond has vanished. With noses twitching and tails wagging, they rely on observation, logic, and attention to detail to uncover the truth. It's a mystery full of friendship, travel, and discovery. Adventurous, but always warm and age-appropriate. The goal of the book is simple: to introduce children to detective thinking in a way that feels playful and engaging. Instead of noise and spectacle, the story rewards curiosity. Children are encouraged to notice clues, think things through, and enjoy how small details matter, just as they do in classic mysteries. If you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or young readers in your family, this is a story we genuinely believe they might enjoy. And if you're looking for a way to support our work during this difficult period, purchasing the book helps us directly, while giving something tangible, thoughtful, and fun in return. As always, there's no obligation. We simply wanted to share something we made together with the same care we put into everything else. The link is in the description, and thank you truly for being here. Chapter 6. Poirot arranges the voices. It has always been one of Poirot's more infuriating habits to become, at the very moment when explanation seems most urgently required, almost offensively neat. While other men grow animated, he grows tidy. He smooths his cuffs, aligns objects upon a mantelpiece, and speaks of luncheon. I have known him, with a murderer practically visible behind the curtains, pause to complain of dust. So it was now. Upon receiving the second threatening note, he became not excited, but precise. He asked Dr. Lund to say nothing of it. He requested, through channels I did not entirely understand, that Anna Marcusson come that evening to a private room in our hotel. He sent also for the prison official who had charge of Sørenson's case, and for one Inspector Rasmussen of the Copenhagen police, a large, solid man whose skepticism toward all psychological nonsense was only exceeded by his skepticism toward foreigners. Most remarkably of all, Poirot arranged for Johann Marcusson himself to attend, on the pretext that a final clarification of the evidence might spare him future inconvenience. "Why would he come?" I asked. Poirot was adjusting the chairs. "Because vanity walks through doors which prudence leaves shut." The company assembled at 8. Marcusson entered last, impeccably dressed and wholly composed. If he was uneasy, he concealed it better than most men conceal contentment. He bowed slightly to the room. "This is most irregular," he said. Inspector Rasmussen grunted. "Then you may leave." "But I do not wish to leave," said Marcusson pleasantly. "I am curious." "Exactly," said Poirot. The room was arranged oddly. Upon the central table stood not only coffee and papers, but a metronome, a crystal paperweight borrowed from the hotel desk, and Sorensen's hat. At one side lay the 2 anonymous notes. Near Anna Marcusson's chair was placed a glass of water she had not touched. Rasmussen looked at the objects with open contempt. "If this is to be a séance, monsieur—" "It is to be an explanation," said Poirot. "Sit down." When all were seated, he began without flourish. 2 men were killed in a bank by Niels Sorensen. That fact is plain. The difficulty has been this. Was he acting from his own criminal purpose, or under the influence, whether moral, psychological, or chemical, of another? Marcusson crossed one leg over the other. A fashionable question. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, and fashion, as Captain Hastings has observed, is often dangerous. So let us remove the fashion and keep only the facts. He lifted the hat. On the inner band of this hat was a trace of chloral preparation. Not throughout, not upon the hair, only here, at the rear edge, in a localized mark. Lund leaned forward slightly. Marcusson did not move. Poirot continued. In Sorensen's room we found evidence of bromide use, nervous exhaustion, and an unfinished letter to Monsieur Marcusson saying, in effect, "I shall not come again. You have no right." We also found a torn chemist's wrapper consistent with a stronger sedative mixture containing chloral. At the lodging house, the landlady described visits from a dark, well-dressed gentleman, after which Sorensen would sit as if he had forgotten the room. In prison, Sorensen described not magic, but repetition. Phrases, challenges, humiliations, concentration exercises, and the gradual blurring of resistance. Rasmussen said flatly, "Manipulation, still not murder." "Just so," said Poirot. "Manipulation is ugly. It is not yet enough." He turned to Anna. "Madame told us that on the morning of the crime her brother was absent from home, though she falsely gave him an alibi to the police. She also told us that years earlier at the Roskilde Clinic, unofficial experiments were conducted upon vulnerable patients, notably upon herself." Marcusson's pale eyes shifted to his sister. "You have been talking foolishly." Anna did not answer. Her face had gone very white, but she sat upright. Poirot lifted one of the anonymous notes. "Then there are these. Both refer not to the bank, but to interference with experiments and to the dead professor, Hagerup. The writer fears not exposure to scandal in general, but exposure of a particular method and a particular history. He fears, in short, that Roskilde will be connected to the present case." Rasmussen folded his arms. "So connect it." Poirot smiled faintly. "Willingly. But first let us correct one little falsehood. Monsieur Marcusson told us he had been reading Schopenhauer at home during the crucial hour. In his library there are indeed several editions of Schopenhauer, uncut. Decorative philosophy. The room belongs to a man who stages intellect, not to one who uses it. That was vanity, not proof. More interesting was another vanity, the word cards in the brass box. He opened it and spread several cards on the table, Sleep, calm, obey, remember. Silence. These, said Poirot, were presented to us as stage effects. They are indeed theatrical, but note the sequence. Not mystical, instructional. Simple words, repeated often enough to a fatigued and dependent mind, acquire force, not supernatural force, but associative force. One need not command a bank robbery. One need only establish obedience, contempt for hesitation, and the glamour of irreversible action. Marcusson laughed softly. Monsieur Poirot, are we now to criminalize conversation? No. Only to distinguish between conversation and conditioning. He placed the crystal paperweight on the table. Madame Anna told us that 3 nights before the crime, Sørensen visited and quarreled with his mentor. Afterward, this object disappeared for 1 night and returned the next day. Why? Because it had been broken or smudged in the struggle? No. Because Sørensen had struck it aside in distress? Perhaps. But the important thing was not the object, it was what it represented. One of the focal props by which sessions were conducted. That night something changed. Sørensen resisted. I said, "The letter." Poirot nodded. Exactly. He went home and wrote, "I shall not come again. You have no right." Very good. At that moment Marcusson faced a danger. His disciple was no longer merely weak. He was becoming disillusioned. Disillusioned weak men are inconvenient. They talk. Rasmussen said, "Still no direct path to murder." Poirot looked at him. "Then let us make one." He turned to Lund. "Doctor, a chloral sedative can produce confusion, lowered resistance, and partial memory distortion." "Yes." "And if given, say, in a small dose to a nervous man already habituated to suggestion?" "It could deepen passivity. It could also cloud chronology and increase dependence on external prompting." "Merci." Poirot now picked up the hat again. The sedative was not administered neatly at a dining table. The trace on the hatband suggests a bottle or applicator pressed there briefly, perhaps while the hat was being handled, perhaps while the wearer was in a confused state. Uncertain, yes. But it agrees with what else we know, that on the morning of the crime Sørensen was in a fog, moving through instructions already planted in him, not acting with the alert improvisation of a self-directed robber. Marcusson said coolly, "A very pretty theory. Where is the act? Where is the proof that I saw him that morning?" Poirot's expression changed. "Ah, there, monsieur, is the final vanity." He produced the prison visitor ledger. In prison, 3 recent visitors signed themselves J. Madsen, J. Mortensen, and J. Mark. Different names, same hand as the anonymous notes, the same careful slope, the same pedantic cross-stroke. You could not resist the initial. You returned to see Sørensen because you needed to know whether he remembered too much. You also needed to frighten Lund away from Roskilde. Marcusson's face did not alter, but his stillness became absolute. Poirot went on, more softly now. "You did not order, 'Go and kill 2 men.' That would have been too crude, too risky, too unlike you. Instead, over months, you built the instrument. You fed a weak man contempt for his own weakness. You mixed admiration with humiliation. You taught obedience while flattering him with the notion of transcendence. Then, when he tried to break away, you acted. A meeting on the morning itself, or very shortly before. A sedative, perhaps under some pretext. The weapon placed upon him. A final barrage of phrases already wired into his nerves. Courage, action, freedom, no retreat. He went to the bank half as a man and half as an echo. The robbery itself hardly mattered. It was a test, a performance, perhaps even a revenge. You wished to see whether a human being could be made to cross the line and never come back. Nobody spoke. Even Rasmussen was listening now. Poirot's voice hardened. And when 2 men died, you discovered the inconvenience of reality. Experiments are charming in pamphlets. Corpses are vulgar. Marcusson rose. This is eloquence, not evidence. Rasmussen stood too heavily. It is enough evidence for a search warrant, re-examination of the chemist, witness statements, and perjury over the alibi. Sit down. Marcusson did not. His eyes had gone, not wild, but bright and small. "You sentimental fools," he said. "The boy wanted transformation. They all do. They kneel to strength and then howl when strength asks a price." Anna made a sound then. Not loud, but terrible to hear. Not surprise. Recognition. Poirot said almost gently, "There. You see, Inspector? Vanity again." He could not leave the masterpiece unsigned. 2 officers who had been waiting outside entered at once. Marcusson turned sharply, perhaps as if calculating whether dignity or struggle would serve him better. In the end, he chose dignity. Men like him often do when there is an audience. As they took him out, he looked once at his sister. "You always were a weak subject," he said. Anna did not lower her eyes. "No," she answered, "only a surviving one." When he had gone, the room seemed abruptly ordinary. Chairs, coffee, lamplight, a scratched table in a hotel suite. Rasmussen cleared his throat and said he would do what must be done. Lund went at once to Anna, not touching her, merely standing near enough that she need not feel alone unless she preferred it. I thought, not for the first time, that remorse is sometimes the only decent thing left to a man. Later, when we were at last by ourselves, I said, "Do you believe Sørensen knew what he was doing?" Poirot was silent for a little. "He knew enough to suffer," he said. "Not enough, perhaps, to be wholly free. That is the tragedy. The law will struggle with such distinctions because the law likes clean edges, and human beings are seldom cut cleanly." "And Marcusson?" Poirot gave a small shrug. He believed that because influence is invisible, it is unreal. That is the ancient stupidity of moral cowards. I looked out across the Copenhagen street, where the lamps were reflected on wet pavement and bicycles moved like shadows between them. "You know," I said, "when we came here I thought Denmark would offer us only clean streets and sensible people." Poirot settled his tie. "My friend, every country has clean streets in some quarters and dark corridors in others. Civilization is not the absence of monsters. It is only the effort to prevent them from calling themselves philosophers." Epilogue. The real crime behind the tale. The case behind this story was the Copenhagen hypnosis murders of March 29, 1951. On that day, Palle Hardrup entered a bank in Copenhagen during a robbery attempt and shot 2 bank employees dead before being captured shortly afterward. The crime became one of the most unusual murder cases in Danish history. What made the case famous was not only the killings, but the claim that Hardrup had been acting under the influence of another man, Bjørn Skov Nielsen, a former prison acquaintance. Investigators examined whether Nielsen had psychologically dominated Hardrup through repeated suggestion and hypnosis, and witness testimony from prison played a major role in building that theory. Danish courts ultimately convicted both men. Hardrup was treated as the direct killer, while Nielsen was held responsible for having driven or manipulated him toward the crime. The case ran through years of legal and psychiatric scrutiny and became internationally notorious because the courts accepted, at least in substance, that hypnosis and coercive psychological influence could be central to a murder case. That is why the affair endured. It was not a simple bank robbery gone wrong. It raised the darker question of whether one weak or damaged man can be bent, little by little, to the will of another. Whatever one thinks of the hypnosis theory in strict scientific terms, the real case remains disturbing because it sits at the border between murder, manipulation, and moral responsibility.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, do subscribe and share it with someone who appreciates a proper mystery. It helps more than most people think, and it remains one of the simplest ways to help this show continue. If you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. And if you'd like to support our work more directly, you can do so on Patreon. Tiers start at $2.99 with ad-free listening and extra stories, or for occasional support via Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. All links are in the description. Thank you for listening. And now, be fair before you are certain, and do not let confidence outrun the facts. Good night.